Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and welcome back to another episode of Stories and Poetry with me, Arief Subhan, here at Muka, Taman Tun Dr. Ismail. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, even though again, not in a physical space, but in a more, internet, spatial, spiritual space. Before we begin, it's important for us to understand that scientific sustenance is important, but spiritual sustenance is as important, if not more important. So I don't want to talk more about that. Maybe you can read between the lines, inshallah. Alright, so the topic for tonight is contentment and happiness. One of my favorite movies is The Pursuit of Happiness, starring Will Smith. I think it's a really, really interesting story about hard work, determination, grit, discipline, to provide for one's family, provide for one's son, and to provide for oneself, because the sense of worth is always tied with what we can contribute to society and what we can give to society, and often, more often than not, happiness is tied with our work. But the text that we are going to read tonight, the story that we're going to read tonight, is about contentment. And contentment is not the absence of happiness. Rather, contentment can do away with happiness, because being content doesn't mean that you have to be happy or sad or anything. Like if you were to look at a scale, for example, being content is the middle way. It is to be in a way wasatiyah, which is moderation, and to be content is basically to be at peace. So the story for today, we're going to be read from the handphone, as you can see, is titled "Don't Chase Happiness, Recognize It," written by Mr. Joshua Becker. Bismillah. One day, a fisherman was lying on a beautiful beach with his fishing pole propped up in the sand and his solitary line cast out into the sparkling blue surf. He was enjoying the warmth of the afternoon sun and the prospect of catching fish. About that time, a businessman came walking down the beach trying to relieve some of the stress of his workday. He noticed the fisherman sitting on the beach and decided to find out why this fisherman was fishing instead of working harder to make a living for himself and for his family. "You aren't going to catch many fish that way," said the businessman. "You should be working rather than lying on the beach." The fisherman looked up at the businessman, smiled and replied, "And what will my reward be?" "Well, you can get bigger nets and catch more fish," was the businessman's answer. "And then what will my reward be?" asked the fisherman, still smiling. The businessman replied, "You will make money and you'll be able to buy a boat, which will then result in larger catches of fish." "And then what will my reward be?" asked the fisherman again. The businessman was beginning to get a little agitated with the fisherman's questions. "You can buy a bigger boat and hire some people to work for you," he said. "And then what will my reward be?" repeated the fisherman. The businessman was getting angry. "Don't you understand? You can build up a fleet of fishing boats, sail all over the world, and let all your employees catch fish for you." Once again, the fisherman asked, "And then what will my reward be?" The businessman was red with rage and shouted at the fisherman, "Don't you understand that you can become so rich that you will never have to work for your living life again? You can spend all the rest of your days sitting on this beach, looking at the sunset, and you won't have a care in the world." The fisherman, still smiling, looked up and said, "And what do you think I'm doing right now?" MashaAllah, that's the end of the story. It's a very simple story, but I'm pretty sure you've heard of this story before. It is a story about being content. And if we can look at the fisherman, he was minding his own business, enjoying the sun, enjoying the time spent on his own, relaxing. And as the Malay saying goes, "Kais pagi makan pagi, kais petang makan petang," which is not necessarily a bad thing, because what it means is that we work so that we can get something in return which is not excessive but is in moderation and is enough. In the world we live in today, this is basically my reading of this story, is that we live in a world of excess, and we live in a world where we need to strive harder and we need to work and we need to compete with one another. And competition is not necessarily a bad thing. But when it becomes an obsession and a fixation to always compete with one another and to lose ourselves in the struggle and the toil of the day-to-day, the 24/7, the rigmarole, the hula baloo of everyday life, we tend to lose ourselves, because when we are in competition, we forget that the important thing is not to chase happiness, because happiness can be a pipe dream somewhere in the future. What's important is to be content in the moment. Now, this example of the businessman coming and basically harassing this fisherman to work harder is akin to our colonial history, essentially, if I may say so. A bit on a controversial topic, but it is, for me at least, true. But to have this category imposed on you by an external party vis-a-vis colonial powers is to indicate that we are, labeled and given this tag as being lazy, when in fact we are content with what we have. We are content with the situation that we are in because we understand the bigger picture. Well, in this case, we can say that we may have been coerced because we live in a system where competition is necessary. So based on the story that we've shared, it's important for us to remain humble, remain modest, and remain content. And if I may add to this, because we live in a competitive world, we live in a world in which happiness is something to be attained, we tend to forget to be in the moment, to be present in the now. And this is a problem that is heightened by the pandemic that we find ourselves in. We think that we need to be somewhere else, we need to be in a situation where we're not right now, and we think about the future, we think about the past, which is inevitable as human beings. It is, you can't run away from the fact that you think about your past and you think about the hypothetical future. But we have to try as best as we can to be in the now, to be content, and to be calm with the trials and tribulations that has been given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The poetry session for this episode will be done by a brother of mine here at Muka. His name is Jul, and I hope you appreciate and you understand the meaning of the poem. It's a beautiful poem, inshallah.
Bismillah. Jikalau aku seorang raja, biarkan aku miskin bapa kedana. Serahkan hartaku pada yang terdesak. Biarkan sahaja aku dengan sepatu buruk, sehelai baju, buku dan pena, agar aku bisa mencatat permasalahan kesesaan sebenar rakyatku. Jikalau aku seorang ahli fikir, tinggalkan aku seorang di gudang kosong, untuk aku bertafakur dalam keheningan. Kubur besi seluas 1000 kaki persegi, tempat minda rumitku bersemadi dalam usaha memahami dunia gila ini. Jikalau aku seorang ahli seni, campakkan aku sebaldi warna, untuk aku celup berus hati aku, bagi melukis pandangan jiwa melalui mata. Ke atas kanvas putih menyala, meraih nyawa sekali sekala. Namun, aku hanya seorang manusia, mencari diri di spektrum makna. Tapi jauh di dalam tubuh ini, aku cakna bahawa aku hanya hamba hina dewata mulia. Puisi karya Arief, dibaca Ubi Panas. Sekian.
And with that, I hope to catch you in the next episode of Stories and Poetry. As always, it is a pleasure to be here with you, and it is always a pleasure to be with friends and family, and inshallah I'll get to see you physically sometime in the future. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Hare